Hey y'all, it's your girl Cachet, and we are here for episode 5 of season 3 of Writerly Conversations. I'm here with my lovely co-host, Britt Writerly. I'm not even sure which side is gonna come up on, so I'm gonna do both, and we just gonna act like it was on the right side. With my co-host Britt Writerly, and y'all, we are almost halfway through the year already. It's crazy, crazy. And so for this month, we wanted to get back to a specific writerly conversation. Or last month we talked about poetry, read some really good things, had some really good discussions. So that's awesome. This month, as we're coming out of a Camp NaNoWriMo, where you finish the story and things like that, we wanted to talk about receiving feedback. And so this is a topic that is very interesting to both of us because it has definitely been something we have both bonded and cried over as far as stories go, like with each other. So I will introduce herself and then we'll get into the 4 questions we have for today's conversation.
Yeah, this topic is near and dear to both of us. We've both been burned by this at least once, if not multiple times. But anyway, hey, hi, hello. I am Britt. My channel is Britt Writerly. It's a book and author tuber. Talk about the intersections of literature and culture. ABC, once you feel that sounds interesting to you, head on over, snoop around. If you like the vibe, make sure you like whatever videos you watch and smash that big red button so we can be internet friends. All right, Cachet, take it away.
All right. So our first question is, what are 3 things or 3 rules that you have for yourself as far as like going into like looking and receiving feedback? And so for me, the first one is choose the people wisely. Choose people wisely. And we've talked about critique partners. I feel like we haven't had like a full conversation on like beta readers, critique partners, and like the levels of like readership that you have in your story. Maybe something we might do later on. We'll put a pin in that for later. But for me, I have critique partners, then alpha readers, then beta readers. And it is very specific for each one. Like if I choose you as your beta reader, you will almost probably never be an alpha reader or a critique partner unless like we get really close. Because critique partners are the people that I'm really, really close with. Critique partners are the people that get to see the draft as it's developing. So even before it's a draft, when I'm like working on a scene. And so their feedback for me is the most important. There's the ones that I take into consideration above everybody else's. And for me, those people are like, it took a lot for those people to get to that position. And it took me seeing their writing and how they develop their writing and where their skill set is to do that. Alpha readers, I pick them just as carefully as critique partners because they usually are reading the first draft. So after I've actually finished it, I'm like, okay, I need to send this to a few people. So critique partners will get it too, but alpha readers, for me, those are people who, almost all of those are people who have already published. That's not the same for my critique partners. My alpha readers are usually people that have either already published or they read heavily in the genre that I write in. Because that for me means that like they're gonna pay attention to conventions of that other readers might like other readers in the genre will pay attention to, but other people I might ask might not catch these things and be able to answer the questions I have. And then beta readers are usually like the people who I know always want to read the stuff that I want to read. And I trust them to give me good feedback because they'll be thorough about it and they'll like ask me questions. But they're not always friends. So it's not like they're not like people that I'm always just super close to and I talk to about everything, or I talk to about things, or even talk to about the story. Usually they're people who like might know just the premise of the story. And I know that it's something that they would be interested in that I give to them. But in saying that, beta readers is probably the group of people that I'm the least pickiest with. Because by the time I've gotten into beta readers, I've had critique partners and alpha readers read it a couple of times for it to, get right there. So I'm just very particular about those and just understanding the hierarchy of them. Because again, for me, and when we'll talk about a process, it changes how I process the information that you give me and use it. The second thing I would say is clear your head before reading. I don't start editing feedback if I'm in a negative place, because then I know all the negative things are going to ring louder for me. And you could have written 2 paragraphs of stuff that you liked, but the 3 sentences of stuff that you hated is all I'm going to remember if I'm already in negative headspace. So I try to do that. I'm also mindful, there's like a piggyback off of that one, of if I begin to feel negatively as I'm reading the feedback. If I begin to feel negatively, for me, a lot of times I will stop reading it for a while, take a step back, and come back to it later, because I need to check my emotions and what's making me internalize a negative feeling, right? Because like sometimes we can feel negative things and just shake them off. But for me, if I'm feeling it as I'm reading the feedback, it's like, nah, I need to step away so I can officially take it away and look at it from an outside view. Am I upset because I didn't think this was good feedback, or am I upset because I'm taking this personally and not thinking of this for the betterment of the story? And then the last thing I would say about I think about or look for when receiving feedback are good communicators. Like I want to make sure that I'm communicating effectively what I need from the people that are reading it, but I also want to make sure I'm choosing people who can effectively communicate back to me. So if they're saying something that they dislike in the story, I like to make sure that the people I'm choosing are people who are willing to have a phone conversation with me, or voice messages, or a Zoom call, or whatever, so that we can verbally have a conversation, because sometimes things don't translate just in writing draft notes or sending you a few paragraphs of what you thought overall of the story. And so those are things that I look at. Like, I want to make sure that the person can communicate. I want to make sure that I have chosen the person that I'm going to allow to read my stuff wisely. And I want to also make sure that I am mindful of my mental state before I accept feedback. This is positive or negative, to be honest, right? Before I accept any feedback, because again, if you're not in the right space, you can get an inflated head ego too, and because one person said they didn't like something, but 6 people said they did like something, you might discount this one person because of this other, and it'd be a very valid criticism that you still need to hold on to. And we've seen that, right, with books that have been traditionally published, that people have been like, well, I know I said when I was a advanced reader, ARC reader, I put that this was bad, and they left it in the book. You know what I mean? So it's just, those are things that in the 3 years we've been doing this, have come to the point like, all right, I'm mindful of that.
Those are really good. And also, like, those are also some of mine. So in the interest of giving y'all 6 strong tips and not just like 3 that are really similar, I think every single thing that Shay said is so important. So maybe this is gonna be one that y'all want to go back and listen to, like the How to Pick a Critique Partner one. And that was also one of our like strongest videos of like writing advice. That one is so important. And this is gonna be another one, because all of those points are so important, especially thinking about like how you're ranking people, because it can be really cool to get advice from someone who you think is like top tier and you really respect, but if they're not going to be available to follow up on that feedback, the utility could be limited. So, but you know, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So my 3 tips to add on to Shay's are going to be a lot about time, how to like be in the time of getting feedback. So number 1, you want to give yourself time to make a really good draft. The worst experiences I've had with writing when it comes to putting my writing out there is when I have been feeling really rushed to get a draft out there. PitMad is in December. Author Mentor Match is coming up. The application's about to be due. Like all of those things, but I don't feel like I have time to really explore. Because for me, exploration is what makes a strong draft. It's not just executing what's in the outline. It's giving myself time to be like, oh, this part of the outline. Oh, but what if I did this also? Okay, I'm gonna have to put this here and then go back and like give a little bit of an Easter egg and then come out, and then that'll make this part even more. Like, I need time to do that. I need time to discover and explore. I want to be brave. If I'm like, oh, I want to try to represent this really difficult thing, I need time to like put it in there the way I want it to be, so that when I give it to my critique partner, when I'm giving it out for revision, they're getting one, the best I have. It makes no sense for me to send something that I know is bad and then get feedback about them telling me what I already knew. That's a waste of their and my time. Make sure that you have done the best you can when you are giving out that draft for feedback. And don't have it out there with things you already know need to be fixed, and then ask for just general feedback, right? So if you're going to do that, say, I already know that X, X, and X needs work. What I'm asking you to look at is X particular thing. So give yourself time to be, one would be give yourself the time to produce a strong draft. And I guess 1A, since I mentioned it, would be like, be specific in what feedback you want. If especially when you get to like later drafts and you've already had several rounds of feedback, be specific about what you want, because the most frustrating thing is getting feedback on something that you have no interest or intent in changing. And that's what all their feedback was about. So you can't really use what they gave you, but be specific so you're not wasting their time. So that's the first thing. The second thing is work on new projects while you wait. It can be really like anxiety inducing when you got something out in the world, you're waiting on a response and you don't want to be bothersome to them, but you are like, I want to know, I'm so excited. Put that energy into a different project, right? So work on something else while you wait. And that also helps to give you perspective that you're a writer. We're writers. We're not just working on one project. We want to have multiple projects, multiple books, short stories, poems, flash fiction pieces. We want to have multiple works in the world. So don't collapse all of your energy into one work. Produce something else. And that can also help when that feedback comes back. If it's not necessarily what you wanted to hear, that can help you to sort of divert some of the disappointment into another project and not make you feel like, oh, I spent all this time on this project for even more work to be done. I'm a failure, It's like, oh, maybe I need a break from this project for a bit. So when we go back to working on this thing that I was working on, I'm going to come back to this project when I have better feelings about it. So I always advocate for having multiple buns in the oven, particularly when you're about to start soliciting feedback for a particular project. And then the final thing is give them time. Don't ask someone for feedback in December that you want back by January 1st. It's holiday season. People are busy. You're setting them up to not be able to engage with your work effectively or efficiently or honestly. So be very mindful of when you're wanting feedback. Be mindful if it's a good time for you. Do you have time to make a strong draft? Do you have time to, and the emotional capacity, right? Like if around Mother's Day is a hard time for you, then don't give someone feedback in February that you want back in May. Like have it come back a little earlier, a little later. So because feedback is vulnerable. Don't have it come back in a time where if someone says one wrong word to you, you're going to be like hulking out. So just give them the time that they need and plan the time to where it's coming back at the best time possible for you to receive feedback. Now, that being said, 3A, you don't have to open feedback as soon as you get it. Maybe you just need it to be back by a certain time, but you're not going to be able to open it. That's fine also. So just be very mindful of the timing of feedback and don't feel rushed to give something out for feedback before you're ready or to open feedback before you're ready. Thank them as soon as you get it. Ask them if you can follow up with them in a few weeks or whatever, and then put it in a file with a little alarm on it or something. So those would be my 3 tips for feedback.
I think those are all like super good and really important, especially the time, because I know I'm the worst about giving feedback on time. Like it'll be like maybe a week after I'm supposed to give it to you, and it'll be thorough when I give it to you. But and the crazy part for me is I always start reading right away. It's just something happens and I don't finish it, and when I read, it doesn't matter if I started your book already. I always start back from the beginning when I'm trying to do your feedback. So I'm like aware of everything in there. That's why I know Britt's story so well, because I would like start reading it and then stop and then have to start all over again, because I don't like to pick up in the middle, because I'm like, it's been a month and this is a fresh story. I want to give fresh eyes to it. So I try to do it all in one sitting. And it's hard to do. It's hard to do, to give feedback on a full novel in one sitting. It's hard. That's why usually it comes a little week late, but it'd be good. It'd be thorough when I give it to you. Be there. So I think that's definitely important. Just what you're saying about time in general for yourself and for the other person. So second question, what does your beta reader, CP, alpha reader, whatever, whoever's reading it, feedback implementation look like?
You want me to go first?
I went first last time.
Yeah. What does my implementation process look like? It's evolved over time. As you know, scrapes and bruises teach you things. You do things differently the next time. So right now, what it looks like, giving space for continued growth. Excuse me. Right now, it looks like being really mindful of, can I take this feedback right now? And sometimes I'll get it. Thank you so much. Can't wait to get into it. We'll follow up. And then if I can handle it, I'll read it right away. If I can't, if I'm just feeling really, really busy and and it takes a lot of discipline to put feedback away for some time. Let me also say that. Because we curious, we want to know. So it looks like me really trying to be disciplined about and emotionally honest with myself. Can I take it if what they say isn't exactly what I want to hear? If no, put it away. If yes, go for it. So I check in with myself about that. And then I read the feedback and I take notes, because my critique partner, two of my critique partners give me feedback in the form of edit letters, which is, I appreciate so much. And that's how I give feedback also. Like I'll give line notes or in-line notes, but like, English background. So I'll give line notes about maybe some grammar stuff if it's like a recurring pattern. Oh, this section is awkward. Oh, like I'll give like those sort of like in document sort of comments, but then I give an overall letter at the end about like my reader experience, and also trying to like summarize the things that I said, be it things about grammar, things about structure, things like I try to make it where they can understand all that I've said in the document by reading the edit letter and then go into the document for specific instances. And so I have a couple of critique partners that do the same thing. And so I start with the edit letter and then I go back through for their line comments. And I take notes on the edit letter to sort of break down the paragraphs into bullet points of things that I want to incorporate, which also is a good practice because there are some things in edit letters that you don't want to incorporate, and that's fine. Feedback is just that, a suggestion. You don't have to do it. And so I find it a helpful practice to break down the edit letter into bullet points in my own notebook as things that I want to incorporate so I don't have to continue to go back to the edit letter, specifically if the feedback was difficult for me to, and I've had to do this with my dissertation. If the feedback was really hard for me to take, I don't want to continue to open that document from them. And so I will write salient points into my own notebook so I don't have to continue to open the feedback document from them if it's going to trigger that negative emotional space, that feeling that I can't do this, that feeling of hopelessness. These, like, it's really hard sometimes. And so I've just been in the practice of like putting it in my own notebook. And then I typically will then step away from that project for about a week just to give myself time to really process all that was said, honestly, whether it was really good or not. Whether it was like, oh, this was really great, or it's like, I would do some substantial changes. I tend to step away from projects for about a week after feedback just to give myself time to really marinate in what was said and to think, because I have rushed in to feedback before when it was like really good and really exciting. And then after about a week, which is about how long it takes me to process regardless. So when I'm not giving myself that time and stillness, it'll catch up to me in about a week when I'm like, wait, maybe I should have actually done X, and by that time I'm a week into revisions. So I give myself a week to like think through all of the plans I want to do, whether I'm excited about them or dreading them. A week is about how long it's going to take me to bake whether or not that's how I should do something. So it really goes back again to like emotional intelligence and time for me about how my process of taking in feedback.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so for me, it is reading through the edit letter note thing, because critique partners do the same thing. But a number one for me is I have some kind of face-to-face or phone messaging or voice messaging go back and forth. I'm big on people's tone and body language. And so I prefer to be able to see you talk about what you read, because I prefer to be able to see like what annoyed you, what didn't, are you smiling, do you really sound as happy, was it really as funny as or like that, because I think sometimes when there are people who know your writing and think you are a good writer, in general, sometimes it's hard to just accept positive feedback they give you, because it's like, well, you're not really saying anything negative. And I know that something needs to be worked on. I know something needs to be changed. And so being able to see the person, and sometimes just hearing the person, it helps me to be able to ask better questions, digging questions, to get more of the feedback I'm looking for. So part of my process is also like looking for ways in which I can pull more feedback out of the person than just the like initial what they did when they read. Because from my experience in these last 3 years, I realized there's a lot that people don't say, that they don't write down, but they do feel about your story, that you can get from how they move.
Can I just interject right there and just like give a shout out to Shay for like she sort of does that even when she's not the one receiving feedback. Like if she is giving me feedback, she'll always be like, do you want to talk about it? And sometimes I'm like, I really don't. But like there's been a time where like we've been talking about it and I was just having a bad week. And I really should have just not read the feedback at that time. Like I said, we get bruised and we do better next time. I read the feedback and she was like doing exactly what she said she does for her own. She was like looking at my body language and listening to how I was asking certain questions. And she was like, are you okay? And I just broke down crying. I was like, no, I can't take any of this right now. And like, if you are like, you know, there are levels to it. If you are really close to the person that you're giving feedback to, I would definitely encourage you to, if you know that you know them, you know how excited they were about that story, you know, if you're giving feedback about a character that they think is perfect and you're like, I don't think this character is perfect, like be cognizant, be very intentional about how and when you give them that feedback. If they're already having a bad week, hey, can I give you this feedback like next week? Sorry for the delay, Like you don't have to tell them you're having a bad week and you're kind of a basket case right now, but you can just say, can I give it to you next week? Is that okay? When you give it to them, hey, do you want to follow up? I said a couple of things that I think we would be better in that conversation. I sort of wrote them the best that I could, but I want to talk to you more about it and ask you some questions. Like, there's a way to take care of people while you're giving them feedback if you already have a close relationship with them, and it just makes the feedback process easier to process later. Like it's a way for someone not to create an aversion to even getting feedback, because that's what we don't want. Everyone needs feedback. So the way that you give someone feedback helps them to continue to be able to solicit feedback at all. And Shay has been just like really, really mindful of that and modeling being caring in that really vulnerable practice of giving feedback. That's all. I just had to hype you up in that moment.
I was like, I hope she ended on a positive note, because it definitely sounded like I made you cry. And I was like, dang, I was not trying to make, I wasn't, y'all. It's not what's happening late.
It wasn't Shay that made me cry. That story already had gotten so much like all over the place feedback. I was just really frustrated. But Shay did a good job about checking in with me in that frustration and like giving me permission to express it, because sometimes people can be like, oh, you need to be professional on how you receive feedback, like feedback is vulnerable. If you know this person, like it can be good for them to give you permission to not just like stone face it and be like, thank you very much for your time. Like if that's your friend, be like, I just need a moment because can I just tell you that I'm so frustrated with the feedback from this story from all the people. It's been this, it's been that, now it's this. I don't even know how I'm going to incorporate. Like sometimes you just need to be able to like erupt a little bit and express all the things that you're feeling. So Shay did not make me cry. She gave me permission to cry, which I already wanted to do.
No, I know, because I remember exactly when this happened. So I was like, I know, I was like, y'all, man. But no, because again, y'all know me, I talk about mental health and knowing yourself all the time. Like knowing where you are is super duper important. And we'll get into this in another question, but I know that me being mindful of it is because when I first joined the writing community and somebody read my stuff, like how they reacted to it and what they did, it put me in a negative space and I wasn't writing. I think I didn't write for like a couple of months because I was really proud of what I had put out, and just the way in which they had gutted it made me feel away. So because of my own experience, it made me want to make sure I'm giving space to people that I'm being asked to give feedback to make them at least know that getting feedback to me does not become an unsafe space for them, because that can be that, and that's partially why most of the people I give feedback to are critique partners. Like I don't read a bunch of other people's stuff in that way. I'll do arcs more than anything, because I don't really want to be in those early stages for other people if I'm not close to you, because I do care about how you receive the feedback. And I do care about how it affects you, especially if I think you're a good writer, because, if it affects you negatively, it might make you not want to do this thing that I think you're good at, And then I want to say like the last thing that is a really big part of the process for me is putting the current draft like up on one side of the screen, putting the person's notes on the other side of the screen so that I have the clean draft to like write in my thoughts or whatever from what they said, because it works for me to compare and contrast. And I'm not one of those people. I can't stay in drafts that other people have already marked up. Like I have to just start all over and just go through there. And it works for me because between having their stuff up and then like the notes that I've had that I took from what they said or I took from the conversation, because that's another thing. If I'm meeting with you face to face, I'm taking notes on what you said. I'm taking notes on your body language. I'm taking notes on things that's like, okay, well, it seemed like, again, when we talked, it seemed like I heard this person mention this character more than anybody else. So I want to make sure that this character stays strong throughout the story. It seems like this person talked about, I like the jokes, I like the banter. So I want to go through and see if there are any ways that I can like punch that up or add that in somewhere. Like those are things that I try to do. And that's why the like side by side kind of helps for me. So yeah, that's that. The third question is, how do you correct a draft that's been gutted by feedback? Or no, sorry, that's the last question, my bad. So the second question, the third question is, how do you process negative feedback in writing and personally? And for that, I meant more so like, how do you process it in your writing as you're like going through the draft, but also personally, how do you deal with how it affects you mentally? And so for me, the most recent thing that I can think of that was like it made me feel really negatively was when I was getting feedback on Karma Always Comes Back. And it was the rush draft that I did after like having COVID, and I like had like a little bit of time to just get it done. Now, when I got the feedback, because it was from someone who's an alpha reader from me, and they are published, and I genuinely respect their opinion because they read so highly in the genre and because they're writing in the genre. I cried. Like I would cry, and I was like frustrated, and I was like, well, maybe I won't even turn the story in. And maybe it's not good. Now, in this time, the three of my critique partners that were able to give me feedback, I told them all about this, and each one of them in this moment, each one of them talked about the validity of the statement, but also the validity of all the other statements that have been given about the story. So like, yeah, I can see where this person who reads the genre could say this thing is that I could see that, but also I do like the genre movie-wise or book-wise, and I didn't see it as that. I saw that there are multiple variables to that. So it's not necessarily bad that they figured this out early on or anything like that, because for me, the journey was this. And so for me, one, I have other writerly people in which I can speak to privately about it and vent to about it. I make sure that I have people that are a safe space for me in that. But then I had to take into a few accounts. It was a rush story. I had COVID. This person didn't have a lot of time to give me feedback. I didn't have a lot of time to get feedback and reincorporate it or think about ways to change it. And all of these things were making me react negatively to the feedback. Because had this person, I have not got sick, and this person gave me that feedback 2 months before, I don't think it would have felt as negatively, because I didn't have like 2 more days for the dude needed the story. I have more time to flesh it out, more time to figure out, well, if they said this was too simple, how can I figure out a way to make it just teensy weensy more complex, right? So it took me sitting back after I returned the story in. By this point, and I'm still kind of stewing on how mad I am about it, to realize that I wasn't exercising a good handle on my emotions in this. That yes, it was negative feedback, but I started to internalize it because of all the other negative things that were surrounding the feedback. And so now what I'm realizing is I take a moment to make sure that I'm understanding that the negativity in the feedback is not about me. It has nothing to do with me. My worth is not tied to it. My skill set is not tied to it. My ability to get a story out there is not tied to it. It is to help make the story better. I didn't choose someone who I thought would have impure intentions to read my stuff to begin with. So my thought always, even when it's negative, is this person's intention was to help make the story better. And having that mindset going in with how I'm processing it just makes it such an easier experience. So much less anger, so much less animosity, so much like, I don't want to send that person my story again. I don't like how they feel. And it's like, no, I need this person as an alpha reader. I like their opinion as an alpha reader. I like the things that they pointed out, because even though I couldn't use it on that story, I did use it in another story later to be mindful of, and so in that, it's just taking the time to take a full account of the entire situation, not the moment, not the sentence, not the paragraph, but the entire situation in which you're in. Just like what Britt was saying about what's going on in your life at the time that you're getting the feedback. What are all these things that could impact the negative feedback? And again, if you're choosing the people wisely, my first thing is your intent is positive. I never assume that your intent is negative, because I chose you, and I chose you specifically because I know you want to make the story better. And so I think for a lot of people, and my first mistake, and the reason when that first person read it and gutted that story, it hurt so much, is I didn't know that person. I had no real connection or relationship to that person. And everything that person said about the draft and everything they did, I took as like a personal attack to me and my ability and my skill. But that person chose me. That person came to me and was like, I like to read your stuff, and I like, to give you, I want to be an editor, and I like to do it. Hey, I don't know anybody who wants to be an editor, and I'm just getting into this. So yeah, sure. Here's the longest thing I worked on. I got like 6 chapters, tell me what you think of it. And all the people I know who aren't writers who have read it have loved it and thought it was a great story, but this person's a writer, so I gave it to them and everything like that. And I say this not to be rude and not to be fear-mongering, but be careful of people who come to you to read your work. And just be careful of that. Be careful of that portion of it. When you are looking for feedback, it should be from people whose opinions you desire, and not people who desire to give you their opinions.
Because can I just tell you, their motivation could be a bit selfish. Oh, I want to sharpen my skills on you. That sounds like it could be a little bit violating. Like there could be a violation there. Just in, you trying to get better at something through responding to me and giving me advice. Like, that's kind of a recipe for disaster because of their motives are in the wrong place. That's what I say. So it's not about fear. It's just about considering the source and considering their motives. Why would someone that you don't know come to you for that? So don't be fearful, just be wise. Okay, so what I will say before I respond to the question is, so when Shay was talking about like, when you know it's not, even when it's like negative feedback, that something that has really helped me is rebranding how I categorize feedback. So instead of categorizing it as positive and negative, which has truly just like ravaged me, I like, when I was getting a lot of feedback on #FirstFantasy, a lot of it was negative, and it was really difficult for me to continue to work on that story, because then I started to feel negatively about the story. So now I don't think of it as positive and negative. I think of it as, is this feedback celebratory or is it constructive? Are they celebrating this particular character of like, or I love this moment, I love this scene, I love their banter. This was a part in the story where I was like, oh, and it all came together. That's a celebration, right? So is it celebratory or is it constructive? I didn't understand this. I think you're starting in the wrong place. Those things are not negative. They're just giving some feedback on a way that you may do it differently that could further the development. That's constructive. You can work from that place. And rebranding it to constructive for me made me just feel less negative. Because for me, if the feedback is truly like, there's a category for negative feedback, but it can't be everything that doesn't agree with you. So you do need to know when feedback is really negative, because that feedback has no place in your mind. You need to have a category of feedback where it's like, if it goes in that bin, you throw it out and don't ever consider it again. But constructive feedback also needs a space where it's like, I didn't want to hear it, but it was good for me and good for the story. So that's just one little thing about rebranding that can really shift the way you receive feedback, even feedback that you don't want to hear. And it can low-key like really excite you to be like, hey, that bit of constructive feedback actually gave me a really good idea. So that could just be a way to keep yourself from falling into a pit. So that's that. But as far as how do I handle feedback emotionally, actually the rebranding part is a big part of that. Rebranding how I think about feedback, taking time from it, talking to my critique partners. I had a time where I got feedback from an author that I really respect, and she didn't take a lot of time with the story before she gave me feedback. And the feedback was really discouraging. And she did not mean it to be that way. She was being so generous with her time. And I appreciate her willingness to spend time talking to me about the story. That is true. It is also true that she did not spend a lot of time with that story at all. And so I felt really discouraged, because I was like, what you're suggesting for a rewrite is quite substantial. This on a story that I've been working on for years. So there comes a time when you are really over substantial revision. And I've been at this time for #FirstFantasy for a while. And so one thing that I would say, and we say it often, you got to have your people. I called Shay, I called my writing homies, like a couple of critique partners I met when I did the We Need Diverse books, mentorship. They encouraged us to find like little critique partner communities, and I met them there, and I still talk to them regularly. We meet every week and we share stuff. And so I talked to them also about the conversation and the feedback and how I was feeling. And they have all read this story. And so they were just like, bump that for real. Like, nah, throw the whole thing away, really. Like, and you need people who care about you, know the story, but are far enough away from it to be able to be like, nah, I know you're real close to it. I know you respect this person, so you want to find a way to hold their feedback. But I'm telling you, throw the whole thing away as far as that feedback goes. Like, that just, no. And so that also has been helpful to be able to, like Shay said, vent. Like, I just need to be the only one talking for the next 30 minutes. Like, I just want you to listen, and I just like make your little like affirming sounds of like, no, she didn't. Like, that's all I need. That's all I need. The little affirmative, I'm still here sounds, until I'm like, and I just feel away. That's the end of it. After my whole 30 minutes of ranting and venting, and I just feel away. And then you go in, right? Like, it's important to be able to have that space and to have people who you trust to, when you say, I just feel away, to use their perspective to help you. And even if they're not saying throw the whole thing away, like with Shay's thing, right? Like, okay, I can see that, but also consider this. And I think for this reason, X, X, and X. So it's also really valuable to have people around who can help repackage constructive feedback that wasn't, that just came at a bad time, or even wasn't packaged well. So even if someone said something the way they said it was mad rude, if you are like listening and you're like, oh, that was good feedback, it's helpful to be able to talk to somebody who is like, I don't like the way they said that. What I do like is the suggestion to do X, X, and X. You might try it. Like, I have learned to be around people who are as energized about my stories as I am, so that when I am at an ebb, when I feel like a motivational dip, I can talk to them and they can be like, oh, but I'm so excited. Like, for Toast of Eliza Black, like Shay and one of my writing homies, they are just complete fans of Laz. Like, they love him so much. Shay already knew what I was gonna say. They love him so much. Whenever I'm feeling like a motivational slip about Tales of Eliza Black, I'm just trying to get to Laz. Like, I'm just trying, like, his story needs to be out here. Mine was Tales of Eliza Black, but they're here for Laz. So it's part of my process when I'm feeling low to talk to people who I know can lift me up. So that's for me in my own body. In my practice, I step away. And I've also done working on like a flash fiction addition to the story that I have no obligation to enter into the story. Like, I'm feeling really over Tales of Eliza Black. I'm not, but like, there have been times when I have been. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm tired of all the structure. The magic system is bumming me out, but I love Laz and Eliza. And so I just write a little flash fiction scene with Laz and Eliza just loving on each other. And I'm just like, oh, the story is so good. So I give myself time to interact with the story in a way that does not have to be responsible to the full length project. And that also can help me to just get some more energy around wading through feedback, wading through revision, all the things. So find ways to engage with your story that feel less serious.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay, so last but not least, how do you correct a draft that's been gutted by feedback? For me, it's, what are the kernels of the story that don't change? So like, if I'm looking at the things that have been gutted, what are the things that are left if I take out of there? And then I look at who's doing the gutting. Who's doing the gutting? Is it a critique partner? Is it alpha reader? Is it a beta reader? If it's a beta reader, I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm probably not changing a lot, because the story, for me, by the time I give it to beta readers, I'm pretty much ready for like the public to see it, because we know me, I'm a very big underwriter and I'm a very complete drafter. So for the most part, the first draft does not change a whole lot by the time I get to the end. Like, what was there probably stays there, and if anything, it gets like fuller, and like things get bigger. But it doesn't ever really change from the meat of the story. And so when I'm looking at who's doing the gutting, if someone's trying to gut it as a critique partner, then I'm looking at like, okay, well, where am I going wrong? Because they're absolutely not liking or not seeing or not getting the picture of what I'm trying to get them to see, because it's red everywhere, it's marked up everywhere, right? And then I gotta ask myself, what did I ask them? What did I ask them for? Is it marked up and gutted because I asked them to be thorough and give me everything they got, and now I need to be responsible for how I feel about seeing all this read because I got exactly what I asked for? Yes, it's definitely happened before. I have to check myself and not be mad at the person that I asked, right? Because there's a lot of times where when we ask someone for feedback, when we don't like what we hear, we don't like what the response we're giving, we like to put that on the other person. And obviously we've talked about very much so how it can definitely be the other person. But taking into account and taking stock of the things that I've done to contribute to that helps me a lot with, okay, where do I move forward with this draft, right? And then I think about, for example, of a critique partner gutting what was pretty much draft. So at doing the scissor hands over here, we knew we needed to cut words, right? And so when she gets the draft, the dings that are like famous throughout Karma Always Comes Back, she didn't know what they were for the story. So like when she started cutting, she was like, I don't know why. What is all these doing in here, girl? What is we dinging for? Right? And so when I first saw it, I was like, why is my draft so much longer than what how does she cut so many words? How does she cut so much stuff? Because she was cutting all these things that were like a big thread through the story. But because she didn't know how the story ended yet, at the time that she starts gutting it at the beginning, she can't know that, right? It was not something to be mad at her about, right? It wasn't something to get upset about. I actually giggled when I saw it because I was like, and I was like, you haven't read it all the way through, right? No, I'm doing it as I go. And I was like, okay, well, don't be annoyed, but I'm not deleting any of the dings, just that you know.
Because also, again, she was on the deadline. So I'm trying to turn this joker around. Right. So I'm just cutting as I go and not like, let me read it all the way through and then go back. Like, oh, no, she needs this back today. So again, timing is
important, right? Timing is important because like originally, and I think it's because we both had the documents open, so I kept getting dings about like her changing stuff, and I was like, dang, is it really that bad? Oh my God, I got like 3 days to get this story, right? But it's important to just take stock of the entire situation, right? And so again, when I'm doing that and I'm thinking about how to correct the draft, I'm looking at what are the main points of the critique? Are they talking to me about the tone of the story? Is it that I need to look at the overall way I'm telling the story? Is it that this story doesn't sound right in this point of view? Is it that I picked the wrong character to tell the story through these eyes? Did I pick the wrong tense to tell the story? We have definitely had where I've written a story and went back and changed the tense, and critique partners and everybody liked it better when it was in this tense. It worked better for how the story needed to play out, right? So for me, when I'm thinking about correcting a draft, when I'm thinking about something that's seeing something that feels like an intense undertaking from the way that I've received the feedback and the amount of feedback that I've received, I'm taking it in chunks. I'm not ever trying to take it all in at one time. I'm very mindful of that, because if it's a whole novel, you're gonna take a whole novel of negative feedback in? I mean, I'm sorry, but not I. You got that. Then you know what's good for the goose may not be good for the gander, and this shit, I ain't even gonna try it because I know me, right? And again, when you choose these people and you've chosen them wisely, you want to do everything that you can to foster a positive working relationship with this person. You don't want this person to feel like they don't want to give you feedback anymore, right? Because another thing is I don't have one critique partner, alpha reader, or beta reader that I don't take feedback from. If I've made it to sharing 2 pieces of work with you and you didn't give me anything to work with from those 2 different instances, you're more than likely not going to be someone I give the story to again. And so I know that if you're someone who took the time to gut a story that I gave you, it's because you really care about my work and where it's going. And you care to do a thorough job. So I need to take care to at least thoroughly read through your feedback and try to understand. And again, back to me making phone calls and videos, because again, this is legit. So did you like anything? anything, you're like, okay.
That's why I say edit letters are a good thing, because
Right.
that's when you can structure how the writer is engaging with your feedback. If you're getting line notes, that what like they're just getting your comments as they come up in the story. Maybe the first thing is constructive and not celebratory, and it can be hard, right? In an edit letter, you can say, first off, tone, first off, premise. It's all giving, and I love it. Like, you can start off differently and then like sandwich in the constructive among the celebratory. If you don't give edit letters with your feedback, here is your official plug to start. An edit letter does not have to be a 4-page Aaliyah letter. It could be 2 paragraphs, but give them a little bit of prose around how to receive your feedback. It can be so helpful and take a lot of emotional labor off of the writer, who already is going to have enough just processing it. An edit letter is such a good way to bring them into the feedback on a more positive note.
Oh, you got it. That was going to be my last point. The point I had anyway. So it's on you. Yeah, you got it.
All right. Yeah. Wow. I forget I think this was my question in the first place, but even when I said it, I was like, I'm gonna let you start, because this is such, I'm in the throes of it, y'all. If you have been following my channel for any amount of time, really since like the first couple of years, I was writing on first fantasy a lot when I first started. I didn't start working on Tales of Lies Black as a novel until like 6 months into YouTube, 6 months into YouTube. But like for hashtag first fantasy, I was working on the entire time. So if you followed my channel, you may have seen like all of the hills and valleys of working on it. And I got a lot of feedback. And so you really just got to remind yourself of what you're here for and what the story is supposed to do. Because especially when you're new to writing and you don't have that community of people who are holding you down, you're like, most people that are giving you feedback are in a professional setting, so they don't necessarily know you, they just know the genres, which has its place, but they may not know why a certain premise of the story or a certain theme of the story is important to you. And they may tell you, well, this genre conventionally, like you might want to just cut that. And you take that in and it rocks you, but you got to go back to your non-negotiables. And it took a long time for me to remember my non-negotiables for hashtag first fantasy, because I had a year of feedback from like 5 different sources of people giving their takes on it. And it was a lot of constructive feedback. It was a lot of constructive feedback, and most of the celebration was around like the voices and the sisterhood and these sorts of things. But that is the kernel. And so after that, I just sort of had to remember and decide a couple of things. One, remember that I am a writer and that this is not going to be my only story. And so I had to decide what I wanted for this story, even if I wouldn't do it again in another story. For instance, hashtag first fantasy has 6 POVs. It's gonna have 6 POVs when it comes out. I would not do 6 POVs again. But hashtag first fantasy, that series is gonna have 6 POVs. That's difficult. That's not usual necessarily. And YA fantasy, multi-POVs, sure, but like the number of like ensemble cast ratio to like single or dual POVs, they tend towards smaller numbers of POVs, especially for debut novels. I don't care. It's gonna have 6 POVs and that's it. So I had to decide, like, that's just something I'm not gonna give up. I wouldn't do it again. But for this story, I'm really attached to it. Whenever I talk to a critique partner about it, they're just like, I mean, I guess, but I'm just trying to think about who you would cut and what you would lose if you did cut it. Like, so you gotta really think about and hold space for, I might not ever do this again, but it's good for this story and that's okay. And so I had to remember that. I had to make peace with elements such as they are. And it also helps me to have so many versions of my stories. It's about 15 versions of hashtag first fantasy. It is, like, and Shay can attest to that because she's read about 7 of them. It's a lot of versions of this, But keeping those versions is really helpful, because when I got to my valied place where I felt like I had completely lost touch with the story, and I was like, the last time I felt really happy about this story was 3 versions ago, and I still have that version. So then I can go back. And I really like Shay's idea of like having a compare and contrast window up to see what the changes do to the story. It has been helpful for me to return to earlier drafts and just read them through as a reader, as a fangirl, and see what parts of the story make me really happy, and then go forth and do that, especially as an indie writer. And also just like checking with myself as a reader. I don't like everything about every book that I read, but do I like enough of it to want to read more of that author? Okay, so then decide as a writer, they may not like X, X, and X, but the story overall is good. These characters are compelling. Their decisions are honest, and they're gonna want to read the next one. So then at a certain point, as a writer, you got some privileges as a writer of just like, I don't care how anyone else feels about the decision, I'm gonna do it because I want to, because it's important to me. And be okay with like paying the cost to be the boss, essentially. So it just has been a lot of like meditation, reflection on past versions, and prayer and meditation about what I want this story to be. But also, again, the more other projects you work on, the more you have perspective on like, let's just get to the end of this story. And the final thing, it goes back to time again, is don't be afraid to shelve a project. It doesn't have to be forever, but I haven't picked up #First Fantasy in a year, and I feel I'm ready to go back to it now. But before, I just couldn't see straight. And so sometimes you just got to cleanse your palette of a particular story, go back, read it, think about the feedback you've been given, and think about, okay, I'm ready. So what am I going to do? And the final thing, addendum, is I've gotten a lot of really cool feedback for #First Fantasy. And I was literally just telling Shay, I think that's a really interesting thought. That could be a whole nother book. So also don't be afraid to like keep feedback, just put it into another story. Because otherwise you're always going to be making substantial changes. And by the time you get done, you've basically written 3 books, but those could have been 3 separate books and you could be done with this project. So those sort of realizations and revelations have really helped me to move through the difficult space of trying to redeem a story that's been sort of twisted by too much feedback, or feedback that I did not handle well, whether because I overinvested in it or under-invested in whatever. Like, that's been the way that I've sort of refined a story after it's gotten really muddied.
I love it. I love it. I think my last little addendum for the conversation will probably be to remember that just because someone didn't like something in your story doesn't mean that it should be taken out. There's stuff that people are meant to not like. Like, someone not liking something doesn't automatically mean it doesn't need to be in the story. And when you were talking and you said something, I was like, you know, that's exactly what that made me think of. That's like a good takeaway. All right, you guys. Well, if you have stuck with us this far and you're here, made it to the end of the video, we want to thank you so much, whether you're here now or watching on the replay. But if you are and you're a writer, let us know about how you deal with feedback. And if you're a reader, let us know which category of reader you would like to be for an author. Would you like to be a critique partner? Would you like to be an alpha reader or a beta reader? Like, which one of those as a reader do you think you could handle giving feedback for? I'm curious of what people think. Like, do you think you could be, because I know most booktube feels like arcs are their thing, but do you think you could be in there before that? You think you could help an author make that final product come together? Let us know. Britt, you got anything?
No, I hope that this has been a helpful conversation for you, because revision feedback is definitely, because of #First Fantasy, is also something that I'm so passionate about, because it can really derail projects and undermine writers. So I hope that this has been encouraging for y'all. And thank you so much for hanging in with us.
All right, we'll see y'all next month on Britt's channel. Bye.
Bye.